Let's jump into the Stanford archive-related questions. Why did Stanford start this project in 1984, continue, and what's their objective in maintaining this archive at this point in time?
Well, I think as I mentioned before, the existence of collections at Stanford already before we even started the Silicon Valley project was a big factor in this, that we already had, because of Stanford's connection to Silicon Valley, whether you're talking about Terman, Hewlett-Packard, the Varian brothers, there were all of these connections, Cyril Elwell, going back. There were materials at Stanford in the archive already relating to Silicon Valley before we even thought there would be a project.
Is this guy in the archive?
Yes, he is. His papers.
That's Shockley, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. His papers are in the archive. It was maybe I'll get back to. Ask me later, and I'll tell you a story about it. So we had already collections in the library that related to this. 84 is, Silicon Valley is a phenomenon that people really began to intensely study, where we would have regional geographers and economists and politicians coming, and we've had all of those in the archive to kind of think about how Silicon Valley would be replicated in other places. That was still not that old a thing in the early 1980s. That had only been going for a little while, this realization that this wasn't just a center of some kind of engineering or invention, but rather there was something quite special going on that went beyond that to reshaping American industry, and as you said, being a part of American history. That was just warming up at that time, and so we were quite early in thinking that combining that growing interest with what we already had in the campus, it would make sense for us to move out and go out into the valley and gather materials. Now, as far as the mission goes, as far as why we do it, why we continue to do it, why we're saving these things, of course, Stanford is different from, say, a museum, as primarily from being part of a university. The Stanford libraries are different from being part of a university. So our primary mission is supporting research and instruction. There's an argument that has to be made then that the history of Silicon Valley is, it's not just collecting interesting artifacts or valuable things. It's about collecting materials that inform research and instruction. And we're pretty convinced of that nowadays. We're not only convinced of that on the main part of campus, the business school is convinced of that, the School of Engineering, which now is a program to recognize historical alums, pioneers from the School of Engineering and so forth. It's recognized around the campus that's part of what students come to Stanford expecting to learn something about. So it's very easy for us to justify the project from that point of view. And that means, of course, that we're putting resources into it for processing, for storage of the materials. And basically at this point, after 30 years, have made a commitment to keeping the archives going.
What about attracting?
Can I just add something to that?
Yeah, please do.
So I also work for Henry in the archives, in addition to doing my own research. I think that's something else that we were talking about earlier. That's I think of the job of the archives as being twofold. The first job is that we try to preserve these materials that otherwise really run a great risk of being lost. I mean, the number of times we have literally gotten things out of dumpsters. We've gotten panicked calls from people saying they are throwing away the contents of all the offices right now. Come and get this. And the second task, in addition to preservation, that I think is very important is the notion of access. So we were talking about this earlier, particularly with some of the more famous, particularly consumer-oriented companies in the Valley. Companies like Apple is the big one. Atari is another big one. These companies, there are collectors / hoarders out there who want to get these things for themselves and keep them tucked away as some special little prize.
For what
And-
reason?
Pardon?
Why?
Because they're collecting and it's theirs. It's mine and you can't have it. And this is
Do they want to sell them on eBay?
Pardon? Sometimes
Do
they
they wanna
want to
sell
sell
these
them
artifacts on
eBay.
eBay?
But I do think this is a very important job that we do as an archive, which is we think about what is it that's important to keep. B, we keep it in a safe way. And C, we make it available so that people can use it and actually see. I mean, so many of these documents that we have, I mean, it's like a time machine. I mean, you are holding in your hand the lab notebook of someone who's come up with an idea that's absolutely changed everything. I mean, here is William Shockley's calendar where he says in little bitty letters, "Group resigns," you know, and I mean, there's nothing like it from a sort of an emotional perspective, and there's nothing like it from a research perspective to have these materials that were put together at the time simply to document, say, to a boss, this is what's going on in the lab, or I just had a meeting with this person, I just got off the phone with this person. And they are writing it down with no secret agenda, and this gets to the whole question of legitimacy and authenticity. You are seeing the little grain of sand before all the layers of pearlization get built up around it, and you can't even tell what caused the irritation that became something big and beautiful in the first place. And that, to me, is a vital role that we perform at Stanford.